The key word that I always try to have front of mind is consideration. I think a lot of times, it's easy to get siloed, when you're talking to partners and you're talking to groups of partners in different practice areas, and they obviously have the expertise in what they do. But I often try to have them consider not just the client and their business, but also the firm as a whole. When we try to look at opportunities, we try to come at it from a viewpoint as opposed to ex-partner viewpoint, you know what I mean? And so, consideration is a key word for me.
Hello and welcome to another episode of On Record PR. I'm Jennifer Simpson Carr, the executive producer and guest host of the show. Today, I'm going on record with Daniel Clarke, Senior Business Development and Clients and Markets Manager at Kennedys CMK. Daniel has more than 18 years experience leading and implementing multi-faceted regional and global business development and client development strategies. Daniel, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm so delighted you're here. It's great to see you. And the last time we were together, we had a long chat in the San Diego airport.
Yes,
right ahead of our long journey back to the East Coast from the LMA annual conference.
Yes, no, it was very insightful and a delightful chat, for want of a better phrase. We talked about the learnings that we took from the Legal Marketing Association conference, which was brilliant. Again, second year that I'd been there, so a lot of fun and a lot more focus for me, which was great. And then the topic of going on to a podcast came up. It was something that was raised during a question I asked at the LMA. And so that sparked our conversation. And here we are.
I loved that. So I forgot that piece of it, but I remember saying to you, you would be great on a podcast. So why don't you join ours? And your response, I don't know if you remember, was, I have decided that I'm going to start saying yes to more things. And so you agreed.
Absolutely. So what's funny is, I'm sure your listeners can tell with my heavy Brit accent, but being at the LMA, I asked a question, and the one of the panel members actually said, made a comment on the fact that I've got a voice for podcast, which is really nice. You being the second person to raise a podcast, and I have a goal this year that I'm going to say yes to more things, be more proactive, and put myself out there. It's the old saying, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So this is a perfect opportunity, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk today.
Well, I'm glad that you said yes to this. So we're in the airport ahead of a red eye.
Yes.
I just made a face because I know people can only hear us, but ahead of a red eye. And what I was really fascinated to learn about you, because it was really the first time, and we've seen each other at conferences, events, we've had the chance to get to know what each other does in terms of work. But I was really fascinated to have a longer chat with you about your career, about your career spanning not only living and working in different countries, but the UK, Singapore, now you're based in New York. And So I'm really excited to talk to you today about that global perspective and how you bring that experience and that vision to Kennedys today in your role.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about that day at the airport, I've been very lucky in the sense that I have obviously worked in various markets. When I was in the UK, obviously being in London, my first firm, I was at Baker McKenzie, and I was in their European business development team, which encompassed me having to travel out to various parts of Europe. So that sort of sparked the comfort, for want of a better phrase, of being in different markets at different times. And then, fast forward to a time when I decided to go traveling for a year. Most people would love to be able to do that, and I was very, very lucky to do that. But that was the pathway to me moving to Singapore. I got brought over there by Cloud & Co. I was in that role for 3.5 years, but I lived and worked in Singapore for 10 years. And the biggest thing that I took from that time being in Singapore, as well as my travels and experience around Europe, was just the various cultural differences and the cultural facets and considerations that you need to think about. Culminating in my move here to the US, I landed here in the US in October 2022. And I think the biggest takeaway, if someone said to me, well, what's the one thing that all of that experience, all those travels have done for you? I just think it's just made me more well-rounded in the, the takes I give and the opinions that I relay and the guidance that I give to the partners that I work with today.
That's fantastic. And so with your experience working in diverse cultural settings, different business landscapes across the globe, What are the most significant differences you've witnessed between the different legal markets?
So I would say being in the UK and the US, what's funny is that both of those markets are very mature, but we're in a strange time where a lot of companies are looking to, penetrate those markets because there's various opportunities that might not be taken advantage of today. Whereas when I was in Singapore, the Asia Pacific legal market is still a mystery at times, just because of the intercultural differences between, the different countries that make up Asia Pacific. So Singapore is, extremely different to Hong Kong being extremely different to China. Then you have, your Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. And so, I still think that there's a lot of firms, I operate in the legal market. And I still think there's a lot of firms, even though they may have been in those regions for quite some time, particularly with Asia, they're still sort of finding their feet, it feels sometimes, and they're still sort of making their way. If you think of Singapore, for instance, you often have to partner up with a local firm in terms of how you operate there. Then you've got countries like Malaysia where international firms might not necessarily be able to operate in terms of their actual office presence. So, they work with best friend or boutique firms. And then, you look at the US legal market, where it's a little bit more freer in terms of international firms being able to operate here, but the competition is fierce because the US is such a huge market. So, you're not just competing with your international competitors and peers, but also, the big local firms in each state, let alone the country as a whole.
It's funny you say fierce because that's exactly how I view not only the business market is fierce competition, but also the talent market right now.
Very much.
The talent pool in the US.
Yeah, I mean, the NMA conference that we went to is testament to that. I mean, if you look at, the fantastic talent, that was around that conference, friends, peers, competitors all at once. You have people who are doing great work in all different facets of business development, marketing. And so, firms are looking to cultivate that talent, and getting in the talent is hard enough, but keeping the talent is, there's that word again, fierce.
Yes, definitely. So you've got this global perspective and you're focused on business development with your attorneys and practices in various markets. How do you leverage that global view when you're working or partnering with your lawyers to retain clients, to go after new business? How do you bring that to those conversations and that strategy?
I think the key word that I always try to have front of mind is consideration. I think a lot of times, it's easy to get siloed, when you're talking to partners and you're talking to groups of partners in different practice areas, and they obviously have the expertise in what they do. But I often try to have them consider not just the client and their business, but also the firm as a whole. When we try to look at opportunities, we try to come at it from a viewpoint as opposed to ex-partner viewpoint, you know what I mean? And so, consideration is a key word for me because, it's also about understanding a client in terms of, their operations around the world in the different parts of the world. And many of those clients operate in jurisdictions that I've worked in, so I like to think that I have an understanding of how people might want to receive certain types of information, how people want to be communicated with, whether it be, remotely, in person, phone calls, but also what they want to see in terms of the information that we're relaying. And so that's just something that's, works for me. I'm certainly not saying that my way is the right way, but I can credibly speak to, sort of cultural differences. I can credibly speak to the experiences that I have and try to apply that in the guidance that I give each and every day.
That's fantastic. And I mean, certainly from our perspective, we value that understanding, that nuanced understanding of cultural differences and their perspective on conversations and traditions. And, we're lucky enough to have some international affiliates that we brought onto the team last year because we realized that it could be a barrier to entry for those of us who don't, have that on the boots on the ground experience and have lived and worked in those different markets. So I'm in awe at kind of that global perspective that you bring to the work that you're doing.
You're too kind. You're too kind.
So, in your role leading global client teams, what are some of the best practices you employ to ensure effectiveness and alignment of these strategies across different regions throughout the world?
I would say, first and foremost, about creating an environment of accountability. You want people to not just understand their responsibilities, but feel their responsibilities. People take great pride in their work. And if they can kind of see and feel how their contribution relates to the bigger picture, I think that's effective. An oldie but a goodie is celebrating success. It's important that people, as I said, get to see, the fruits of their labor. And, you want to cultivate that team ethic. And I think celebrating success is a huge part of that. And again, an oldie but a goodie, if I want to word a phrase, is trust. You have to trust that the advice that you're giving is credible, but also the advice that you're receiving, particularly if you're receiving it from people in a certain jurisdiction whereby you might want to do an action and they're telling you that it's not going to work. It can be quite hard sometimes to sort of go to the easy medium of, oh, they're probably just being difficult. We need to get this over the line. You need to trust that the person who is delivering that advice and is a member of your team, is doing so with the greater good in mind. And so, trust is an obvious one in many facets of work, in many areas of business development. But certainly, I think when you're working across jurisdictional or a global team, it's hugely important.
I think you touched on something really important, which is that perhaps when you don't necessarily completely understand another culture, it is very easy to be in the moment and think they're being difficult. And you've completely hit the nail on the head that if you're going to go into a business relationship, that trust is invaluable because you've engaged for a reason, and their understanding of what will work and what will not can make or break, the success of an engagement. Absolutely.
And I find that, when you do get pushback in terms of being told that something can't happen, it's an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for the parties involved. And it's a learning opportunity for the firm to do better in an area, whether it be to provide a value add service, whether it be to interpret something in another language, or whether it be to do something on a different timeline. It might add more time to your task. It might make things more difficult, of course, particularly if, you are on a deadline and you're getting that pressure, from various parties that we can all relate to in a law firm. But ultimately, I think if your mindset is that this is an opportunity to do better, ultimately for the client, then everybody wins.
I love that. One of my favorite sayings is, if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
Yeah.
And if you view that from the lens of opportunity, you really can be challenged, almost on a weekly or daily basis, and you can continue to grow from that. So I love that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know I'm sure some of your audience members might be rolling their eyes a little bit or think it's a touch cheesy, but it's true. I mean, there are some sayings that stand the test of time because they are true. And as I said, being challenged is a great thing. And so, as I said before, if you're working with a colleague or a party in a different part of the world from yourself, and you're getting some kind of sense of pushback, implement some trust, implement some understanding. And then before you know it, you might be having a whole different conversation about a value add service or doing something better all around.
That's fantastic advice. Daniel, we're going to pause here for just a moment for a message from our sponsor. And when we get back, we'll chat about the trends you are seeing in the global legal market.
Look forward to it.
This episode is sponsored by Furia Ruble Communications. In the ever-changing business ecosystem, it's crucial for law firms and businesses to maintain a focus on innovation, differentiation, and efficiency to sustain their relevance and competitive edge. Furia Ruble's Stride services equips domestic and international law firms and businesses to pinpoint obstacles and inefficiencies, distinguish true unique selling propositions, optimize processes, and adjust to shifting client requirements. To learn more about Furia Ruble's Stride services, visit furiaruble.com/stride.
All right, Daniel, we're back from our break, and I'd love to chat with you about the trends you are seeing in the global legal market.
Sure. No, happy to. It's an exciting time in the global legal market, I think, for a lot of industries. In terms of trend, I think the biggest one, the obvious one, is AI, artificial intelligence. Everybody's talking about it in every capacity. They're talking about, the possibilities. They're talking about what it can do now. talking about what can be done in the future. And for me, again, it's about an opportunity. A lot of people, I think, are fearful. As human beings, we always sort of tend to fear what we might not understand. And, I think it's only right to think about the negative effects it could have, because you want some balance. But at the end of the day, bringing it to the role that I have and, working within legal BD as a whole, I think it's a fantastic opportunity, if only to look at how, AI tools can help make things more efficient. They can create more time for us in business development as well as lawyers to do our jobs more efficiently and to do our jobs better. Because, time is such a valuable asset. And if you have something that can create time for yourself, then, it's like gold dust, isn't it?
And you've touched on something really important, which is balance, because we are in the most, in my opinion, risk adverse industry one could possibly be employed in. So balance is really, really critical. And I'm curious what your perspective is on how, so you've touched on the BD side of it and how internally that can help. Generative AI or AI can help, create efficiency and time savings. Are you seeing any trends with law firms globally, the firms that you partner with in certain jurisdictions? And kind of part two of that is, what are you seeing with legal departments and clients?
I think in terms of law firms generally, AI is becoming part of day-to-day language. Even if you look at the roles that law firms are recruiting for, whether it be on the legal side or the BD side, AI is starting to filter into that. Law firms are wanting talented people to come in to help them understand and use, the technology as best as you can. I've even seen roles advertised in terms of legal BD managers that touch on, practice groups that might be cybersecurity and AI. So it's definitely something that's going to become of greater importance, I think, in the legal landscape generally. And I think overall, you're going to start seeing firms actually putting together products that encompass AI, for clients and, how they, operate within their business and hopefully bring more efficiencies to their business as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're only going to see more evolution in this space. And I've been really fascinated at different conferences throughout this year to learn about proprietary AI that firms have developed and different opportunities they are taking to partner with corporate clients and how they're creating kind of a partnership to test run things together. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
It's interesting that you brought up partnerships. Yeah, that's something I hadn't touched on, which is, law firms, much like, you think of the big accountancy firms, consultancy firms. I think there's going to be a lot of partnering as well in the AI space, because people are just looking to build up understanding and really give themselves every opportunity to understand the opportunities for them.
For sure. So as we're looking ahead, aside from trends, what are you most looking forward to the next 12 months in your role?
Oh, I would say I've only been in the US for 18 months. I definitely would like to get more entrenched in the legal market. I'm still learning. Whilst I have a lot of experience, whenever you move to a new country and operate in a new legal market, there's lots to learn. So that's an exciting thing for me personally. And in terms of my role, I have a client role. So really getting a sense as to, what's of importance to our clients. What are they, what's going to be exciting them in the next 12 months, and how, I can help and how I can help the firm partner up with our clients. Because, yes, we are a law firm. Yes, we have expert legal advisors, but ultimately, we want to be business advisors as well.
Awesome. So I'm just imagining that we have legal marketing professionals listening to this podcast episode, and they're thinking, wow, he's had some amazing opportunities, to work in different markets around the world. What advice would you give to someone listening who may be considering a big move in the legal space that might be scary, or they, might be challenging, or, they're kind of teetering on a big career decision? Could be a big move, could be changing to a new law firm that's very different than where they've currently worked. What advice would you give those professionals listening to this episode about maybe a challenge you've come up against, or, a big decision you've made in your career, and how they can approach this decision for themselves?
So I would say two things. One is, if you're thinking about it, you're ready. This is not something that has just popped into your head. whether it be you've spoken to people, you've heard cool stories, you visited a country and you loved it. If you're thinking about it, it's something that you want, then, you're on the cusp, as it were. The second thing I would say is, certainly in the legal BD space, our network and the world at large is small. Speak to your colleagues, speak to your peers, have a look at what your firm do. You could do it in a multitude of ways. It's not that you have to up sticks, as we say in the UK, and move completely. You might be able to do a short-term secondment. You might be able to do a work transfer. International firms generally have various guises that they create for people in terms of professional development. So, speak to your HR, speak to your professional development advisors, and just, really understand the options that are open to you. If you are someone who's really looking to make a big move in terms of, move country, sell your apartment, sell your car, and off you go. Again, either speak to your firm, they might have an office in the country that you want to go to. What roles are open in that office that you might be able to fill? If there isn't that, obviously there are recruiters out there that can provide great advice as well. I'm certainly not looking to, facilitate anybody getting out of their job. That's not me. So disclaimer right there. But that being said, in the legal BD space, there are a multitude of opportunities, but it all starts with you putting your hand up. If you don't put your hand up and you sort of try to maneuver this on your own, it's a lot to take in and it can feel quite overwhelming at times. But if you put your hand up, you'll be amazed at the amount of support you have to hand.
That's great advice. And you touched on something that I think is really important in our industry, which is that you don't always have to move firms to make a move in your career. I sat in on a great presentation and her name escapes me at the moment, but there was a fantastic woman in our industry who has been at her firm for nearly 2 decades. And instead of leaving to try a new opportunity, she would prepare a proposal for the firm and say, there is a need at our firm, and I think I can fill that. So you've touched on that, and I think that's a great recommendation for anyone, particularly earlier in your career, that you don't always have to leave the firm to find new ways to stretch your career or grow, and develop.
Not at all. I mean, I can use myself as an example with this. So as I said, I was in Singapore for 10 years. The last 3 and a bit years in Singapore, I was at Kennedys. Obviously, we had COVID. That happened. And after COVID, I went to London, see family, which was emotional, as you can imagine. And during my time in London, I went into the London office and I got talking to our global director and just about, how I was feeling, how work was going. And she was the one that mentioned to me that, we had opportunities in the US and it just went from there. I wasn't looking to leave Singapore. I love Singapore even to this day. Singapore was a fantastic place to be, but having been there for 10 years, I didn't have to leave Kennedys. Kennedys, we got talking. There was a need, obviously, it helps if there's a need for somebody like myself to fill. And here I am. As I said, the conversation sort of took on speed at its own convenience. And as I said, here I am.
Well, I'm glad that you made that move because it's meant that we've had the chance to connect through some occasions in New York. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you and more about your career. I'm so grateful that you said yes to joining me today for this recording. It feels like just yesterday we were in the San Diego airport, but here we are today. Thank you for the great conversation. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to On Record PR. Please visit our website, onrecordpr.com, subscribe to the podcast. You can share it with your friends and colleagues. And as always, we welcome recommendations for guests and topics. You can send those to podcast@onrecordpr.com. Daniel, thank you so much again. And to our listeners, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. And a huge thanks for helping me get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Željko Tomic of Compost Media Flow.